everybody. Dr. Melissa Balizan here. Welcome to Take Charge of Your Health, simple steps you can do today to take control of your physical and mental health. I have my guest with me, Dr. Felice Gersh. She is an expert in women's health, and she is a physician known for combining that conventional and holistic therapies together. So welcome.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm thrilled to join you today.
Yes, thank you so much. You know, I'm known for the pharmacist who combines ancient and modern, and you're the physician who combines, just have a different words, but the same concept.
Absolutely. We are philosophically aligned.
Exactly. Perfect. So with that, I know you have a broad range of knowledge, and we have decided today to talk kind of a little bit about the heart. And so let's talk about how to maintain a good, healthy heart system or healthy cardiovascular system.
Well, you can't have a healthy body without one. So yes, it's definitely high on the priority list. And it takes a lot of work to maintain a good cardiovascular system. Well, first, in terms of the vessels, the arteries we'll talk about, that's like key to getting the delivery system working, right? You got to deliver all the nutrients and the oxygen, and also, and this is sort of, very current for the world that we live in, the dealing with inflammation and also inflammation resolution and infections. People don't realize how the vascular system is so key to making that all work. And of course, on the contralateral side, how things, when they don't work, how that can backfire on you and lead to all kinds of medical problems. So the first thing I always like to start with is foundational. It's like what you eat. So I'm sure you deal with that all the time. And what you eat has a tremendous impact on your cardiovascular health. So we like to talk about an anti-inflammatory diet, which I'm sure many of your listeners have heard of, but you can't just listen to it, you actually have to live it, right?
Right.
So yes, it's so important to have an anti-inflammatory nutritional program in your life.
I love it. So without going into a lot of detail, let's give just maybe a couple of hints of what maybe that anti-inflammatory diet would look like.
Absolutely. So it really is plant-based. So when we look at the nutrients that we eat, we always think of them in terms of, well, what's their nutrient profile for our cells? And what we often forget is what's the profile for our microbiome? So there's this incredible new realization that our health is dependent on the health of the trillions of microbes that live in our gut. So when we eat, we have to eat for our own cells, but we also have to eat for them. So the food that they love is fiber. So fiber comes from plant materials. So that's where the plant-based diet is so critical. And so the foods that have a lot of fiber would be whole grains. Notice I'm saying not processed grains. So whole means they haven't gone through a factory and been converted into something else, like a flake or some weird shape like a star or something, right? And you eat them in their natural whole form. And then root vegetables, which have been so maligned because they have starch, but people have to realize that just because they have starch, that's not the same as it's sugar. In fact, resistant starch turns into pure food for our microbes. In fact, not any sugar will get into our bloodstream because it just is not converted that way. So we need to also eat across the colors of the rainbow, because those magical polyphenols that are found in plants like vegetables and fruits, they actually match with our microbes. So different types of microbes like different polyphenols, and there's so many, the luteins and the carotenoids, and then we have the stilbenes. I mean, there's all these families of polyphenols, and that's why you have to eat the various foods across the colors of the rainbow, because the colors are often indicative of different types of polyphenols. So that's really the foundation, is eating real food, natural food. And then we want to have plenty of healthy plant-based proteins. That would be like from the beans and the lentils, the nuts and the seeds, and really limit to animal protein about 3 ounces a day, which is like a chicken drumstick. I mean, so if you get like a size or a very large jumbo egg or 2 little bitty eggs. So it's really not a lot. It's like using animal protein more like a condiment, so it's flavoring the vegetables, and that's where we really want to go. And that's good. It's called often the planetary or sustainability diet, because it's not only good for your body to sustain your health, but also for the planet. So this is the type of diet that foundationally is great for your cardiovascular system. In fact, one of the diets, in fact, the only real diet that has really good evidence for maintaining vascular health, which is represented by hypertension. So the treatment for hypertension can be nutrition. But people don't realize that. They go straight to a drug. But eating a very high vegetable diet, and the conventional one is called the DASH diet, but that actually also incorporates the low-fat dairy, but that is actually not the part that's really the helpful part. It's really getting all those vegetables in, and that's really the real key part of the DASH diet. But so it's really a high plant, high fiber diet that's fantastic for your gut microbiome and similarly for your cardiovascular system. And the other thing that I want to introduce is the concept of nitric oxide, which probably people haven't heard of very much. It doesn't get a lot of attention because it's just not like in the big pharma world, as you know, right? So the drugs that can increase nitric oxide are like nitroglycerin, right? But that's not something that people take on a daily basis. And what does nitroglycerin do? It dilates blood vessels, right? So, but you can get increased nitric oxide by eating high nitrate foods. And so when you eat high nitrate foods, and the one that gets all the play, but it is wonderful, are beetroots, the wonderful beets. And you hear people probably wonder, like, I wonder why people are always being told to eat beets, right? Why are beets trending now? It's because of the nitric oxide. Of course, beets have other things in them, lots of fiber and other antioxidants, but it's that amazing nitrates that are in them. And what happens is in the mouth, there are bacteria. When we have the right bacteria, that make an enzyme group called reductases that our cells don't make. They have to come from the mouth microbes. So that's called the mouth microbiome. That's why now we know that every microbiome matters, including the mouth. And those reductases convert nitrates to nitrites. And then in the stomach and other areas of the GI tract, the nitrites are converted into nitric oxide, which is a gas. It's an amazing antioxidant, what we call a redox. So it's reduction oxidation signaling agent, and it maintains the health of the blood vessels. It's critically important. And half of our nitric oxide in our body comes from the food we eat. Well, hopefully, if we choose the right foods. But all green leafy vegetables have nitrates in them as well. So you don't just have to eat beets. You can eat all the greens, the mustard greens, the dandelion greens, the lettuces, and the spinach, and all these wonderful green leafies will also give you that nitrates to convert to nitrites, to convert then to nitric oxide. And that's how food can be tremendously important for cardiovascular health.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for that explanation. And that's true. The microbiome, that's kind of a buzzword now. It's just been in the last 10 years we've started to hear about that. It's always been there, but we're just
that's for sure
starting to hear about it. So I love that explanation, and how those benefit our cardiovascular health. Now, often, you and I focus a lot with women's health. And I think that most people think that cardiovascular disease or cardiovascular problems or heart attacks, that's just going to happen to a man. That's a man's issue. So let's talk about how that actually looks to a woman, or maybe looks different to a woman than some of the typical symptoms or things that a man would notice.
Well, it is true that up until menopause hits, that women have a substantially lower incidence of cardiovascular events like heart attacks and strokes. But after menopause, which is really the real way of thinking of menopause, is not the loss of menstrual periods, but the loss of ovarian function and the loss of ovarian hormone production. So when you lose estrogen and progesterone, which is, I think of it as the sidekick, like Batman and Robin, and you need them really together, but Batman is still kind of the leader, and that sort of estrogen is sort of the leader. When you lose them, you lose actually the control of your cardiovascular system, and that is very multifactorial. So, but if you think about the consequences, by the age of 65, men and women have identical rates of cardiovascular disease. However, when a woman has a heart attack, she has a substantially higher risk of dying from her heart attack. So it's a really huge issue for women. Cardiovascular events, heart attacks and strokes, are the #1 cause of female death in the US. So this is not a minor problem. By age 75, 85% of women will have hypertension. And that's not an early sign. That's actually a late sign of vascular disease. Now, I mentioned about eating foods to increase nitric oxide. Well, it turns out that estrogen from the ovaries, the form of estrogen that the ovaries makes, which is called estradiol, is key to making arteries healthy and keeping them healthy and producing nitric oxide. That's where the other half of nitric oxide comes from estrogen in the blood vessels. That's how key it is. Estrogen keeps our blood vessels healthy, and nitric oxide keeps blood vessels dilated and keeps the lining of blood vessels from becoming inflamed and thickened. And it's the same thing for the heart muscle itself. Nitric oxide helps to maintain heart myocardial health. So it helps to maintain the proper rhythm and proper function of heart cells. Without estrogen, after menopause, you have higher incidence of heart rhythm dysfunction, arrhythmias, lots of palpitations women experience. You have a certain different type of heart failure that's called diastolic. The heart becomes actually stiffer because estrogen is so key to energy production. Mitochondria, the little energy factories of cells, of which there are so many in the heart, are dependent on estrogen coming from the ovaries, which is lost. And so you end up having stiffer arteries, more inflamed arteries, stiffer hearts, and less functional myocardial cells. So heart disease catches up. The glow of estrogen helps for about a decade. But after that, women are equal. And like I said, they have a higher incidence of mortality. And as you mentioned, the presence in terms of how it presents is actually quite different. But the conventional medical world refers to it as atypical presentation of heart attacks. It's not atypical, it's female. So I wish they would stop that. Okay, men and women have really similar looking cardiovascular systems, but because of their hormonal and genetic differences, they actually have quite different functions in terms of their we'll say, aging processes, how they differ. And so the way that heart attacks occur in females is different. It tends to be what we call microvascular disease. The very small vessels of the heart become inflamed and they can go into spasm. And it's not because the heart is dying, it's because there's an area of the heart that doesn't get enough oxygen and it triggers an arrhythmia, often a fatal arrhythmia, like ventricular fibrillation. So the heart isn't able to pump because of this terrible arrhythmia, and that can be fatal. As well, emotions play a big part in women's heart attacks. Fully half of women's heart attacks, they don't even find severe plaque buildup. It's not that. It's the vessels become unstable and emotions, and we have changes in our autonomic nervous system. And women are more prone to this because we are different than men. And so we have higher, after menopause, output of what we call the sympathetic nervous system, which is causing more vasoconstriction, constriction of the vessels. So women can have an emotional state and actually have vascular constriction of their little arteries, the little microvessels in the heart, causing some decreased blood flow to some area of the heart, which can trigger a fatal arrhythmia or actual malfunction of the heart muscle. And they actually call that broken heart syndrome. There's actually a real name. I mean, you can Google it. It's broken heart syndrome. And it's not from plaque. It's from vascular instability due to lack of adequate amount of estrogen in postmenopausal women. So we are definitely very, very unique. And women have different immune functions, and our immune systems are quite different. So estrogen is present on every immune cell in terms of receptors. So estrogen actually controls immune cells. And women have more immune cells. We tend to have higher white counts. We have more neutrophils, more macrophages. We make more antibodies. We have more B cells, more T reg cells. We do everything bigger when it comes to the immune system. And we have higher survival rates from infections like sepsis. But when we lose our estrogen, it's like weapons of mass destruction throughout our body. And they have capabilities of producing really destructive enzymes. And those enzymes are designed to gobble up and destroy like invading bacteria or viruses. But without estrogen controlling the process, you can actually have overreaction. So it's like craziness, and they overreact to very small stimuli and can actually cause a lot of inflammation, over inflammation. And that can happen in the vascular system, in the heart, it can happen in the gut, it can happen in the brain. And that's one of the manifestations that women have in terms of Alzheimer's, is because they have this uncontrolled set of immune cells, like weapons of mass destruction. But in the vascular system, of course, that can lead to all of the problems involving hypertension and heart failure, and even vascular problems involving the heart valves themselves. So it turns out that estrogen is really key to maintaining collagen, and sort of the structures, the fibrous tissue is really dependent. That's why after menopause, women have much higher rates than men of osteoarthritis, which involves a lot of the connective type tissue. And heart valves are connective type tissue. So you're more prone to getting mitral valve prolapse. People have heard that women have more mitral valve prolapse. And after menopause, they tend to get more valvular problems, which of course can then lead to heart failure as well. So women have to take this message to heart, right? Is that their hearts are very protected by estrogen in the premenopausal years, but that all is lost, and they have to realize their risk is very substantial. Now, women who are using various forms of contraception may actually also have increased risk because they don't really have the beautiful natural hormones and rhythms. So, for example, we know oral contraceptives, birth control pills, are not given to women who have heart attacks, or that high smokers, or even low smokers, right? We don't give them to smokers, period, now, or women who have uncontrolled high blood pressure or blood clots, because all of those things can be exacerbated by birth control pills. Now, here's something that we don't know, because no one is studying it properly, but there actually are studies that have been published showing that women in their 50s now are having higher rates of cardiovascular events than ever before. They're only in their 50s, because typically women got that sort of decade of sort of cushion, like I call it the halo effect from the estrogen they had earlier. And so they don't catch up to men until 65. But now we're seeing women much younger in their 50s having these problems. And no one's looking, because I'm concerned that all those years of estrogen deficiency, if they're using progestin like IUDs or implantables that can lower their estrogen production, or even contraceptives that have, we'll say, non-human estrogens that are not rhythmic, they're not having the same antioxidant effects and all the same beneficial effects. We know that because that's why birth control pills are not given to people who have high risk for cardiovascular events. So I'm concerned that this is creating what I would call premature cardiovascular aging. And that could lead to an earlier incidence of these events in women who are much younger, a decade younger than earlier. So we just need to have data collection. But I always like to warn women that we don't have the data, and that if we know that something is bad for you and that you wouldn't take it at an older age, maybe you should try not to take it for longer than you have to, even at a younger age, because it's still doing some kind of harm, right? Because, and of course, in your world, knowing all about pharmaceuticals, we know that there is not a single drug that exists that doesn't have what you call a side effect profile, right? Right. So we need to be cognizant of the potential cardiovascular effects of a lot of contraceptives, because they are concerning.
Oh, yes, a great explanation. And so estrogen, great.
Yes.
I'm glad I have it. But there's that lack, and then what we do to ourselves, as we're younger, because of those contraceptives and the oral contraceptives. So we've talked about, how we can follow a plant-based diet and getting that, that extra phenols and things into our body. But let's talk about, so those who are younger, they're not at menopause yet. They're in their 40s, or maybe even somebody's watching who's even younger.
Yeah.
And so what else can they do to maybe help boost, a foundation for a good, healthy cardiovascular system?
Oh, there's still so much. In terms of eating, I just want to touch on, it's not just what you eat, it's also when you eat. So we know that inflammation is certainly the enemy of our cardiovascular system. And people who have high insulin resistance states, so like pre-diabetes, they have too high of sugar circulating, then they have too much insulin, and they have just too much of that inflammation. Well, it turns out that insulin is most functional. We say we are most insulin sensitive in the morning, in the first half of the day. But our society feeds us mostly at night. So many people skip breakfast, maybe even skip lunch or have a late lunch, and then they eat most of their food at night. Well, it turns out that this is really bad for your cardiovascular system because you're going to be put in a more insulin resistant state. So if you eat food when your insulin is not working well, which is going to be in the evening, then your blood sugar will go higher and stay higher. And when you have a lot of insulin, insulin also is very stressful to the body when you have too much of it, and it can actually ultimately damage the pancreatic cells. It can really affect the gut microbiome. It can affect the ovaries and damage them. It can cause irregular cycles, and that we don't want. So we definitely don't want to have a high state of blood sugar and insulin resistance. So I emphasize for cardiovascular health and of course global health, try to eat a big breakfast. And there's actually published articles that you are more prone to develop atherosclerosis, plaque and hardening of your arteries if you skip breakfast. So eat your breakfast, just like your mom told you, right? Go back. Breakfast actually matters. And then, of course, there's sleep. I mean, how can I ode to sleep? Oh, sleep is so critical. We are totally different creatures, day creatures and night creatures. And our bodies have different metabolic functions at night. During the night, we do a lot of healing. Our growth hormone comes out at night, which is very important for having proper fertility and cycle. So even if you're not looking to get pregnant, you want to have proper hormonal balance. And people don't realize how important sleep is, and growth hormone and melatonin. One of the most potent antioxidants of the body is only made when we're sleeping. And it's not just sleeping, it's also sleeping at the right time, right? So napping through the day is not going to get it for you. If you work shift work, if you're working at night, you need to rethink your priorities. It's difficult, when that's your career, but at least you should rethink when and how long you want to do such a thing. I had to give up obstetrics a while ago because I was working so much at night. It was really destroying my health, and we have to make choices. That's how life is. It's always about when are you going to put your health as your priority? So we need to think about sleep, and then of course quality sleep. That means you need to be in a cool, dark room. Even a little bit of light filtering through your eyelids will lower your melatonin production. And melatonin is so important for cardiovascular health. It's really important for glucose regulation, which of course translates into metabolic health and cardiovascular health. And then of course there's fitness. So once again, you can't be healthy if you never get up. You know how it's like, I love cliches because they're all true. So the newest cliche is sitting is the new smoking, right? So even if you exercise for 1 hour a day, if the other 23, you're basically not moving, you're just sitting or you're lying, you're not moving, you can't really undo the damage of all that sitting. So you need to get up and walk around every single hour, Fidgeting is good for you. Just keep fidgeting, tap your feet, just don't annoy everyone around you. But definitely moving is important. And then you do want to do a combination of both aerobic and resistance training. Muscle is the unheralded organ of the body for what it does. Muscle is not just about being strong, which by the way is really critical, but muscle is an endocrine organ. Muscle makes cytokines, muscle makes signaling agents, it makes hormones. Muscle is about glucose regulation. It's really amazing. There's even signaling between muscle and the brain. I mean, everything sort of signals the brain. And then of course, bone, when you do weight resistance, you're going to help build your bone. And bone isn't just structural, which is very important in itself. Bone is also an endocrine organ. Bone is key to regulating your glucose. It doesn't also get recognized for what it does. It makes a hormone called osteocalcin, which is key to glucose regulation. So your musculoskeletal system is critical to your overall cardiovascular health. And people don't make that connection. And so even osteoporosis is linked to cardiovascular decline. So we want to keep our bones strong, our muscles strong, and our ligaments strong, and everything. So we want to make sure everything is working properly. And that requires some fitness, exercise. Fitness is a vital sign. So in my office, for example, we actually do a fitness assessment that was created by the American College of Sports Medicine and in association with the American Medical Association. It's an annual test. It's all spelled out, and it looks at your gender, your age, and it tells you where you fit in. Just like we want to get weight, we want to check BMI, we want to get your blood pressure, we want to know your fitness status. That is really a vital sign. We want to know like what you need to work on. And we do body compositions. It's like, you can't just get on a scale and know someone's real health. You want to know, do they have a lot of visceral fat? Are they muscle replete or depleted? So we really need to know these things, because there's a large group of people who are very thin, but they're actually at higher risk of mortality than people who are overweight, because they are and this sounds terrible, but and I didn't come up with this label, but they call them the skinny fat, because they have no muscle. They're really low on lean body mass, and they have visceral fat. And that group, when they get diabetic, which they often do after menopause for women, they have actually higher mortality, because they have really low reserves in their body, and they have such low muscle mass. So the years before you hit menopause are like saving for your retirement years of health. So I can't emphasize how important hormone balance is, the proper nutrition, sleep, and then I would be amiss if I didn't mention stress, right? So stress, when you have a lot of stress, you have a lot of cortisol circulating, and cortisol is essential for life. But when you have too much, it's like too much of a good thing, and it actually increases insulin resistance. And so you're going to, once again, get that insulin up, and then you're going to create that inflammatory state. You're going to be in big trouble. So chronic stress is so harmful. And I mentioned how a stressful event can actually trigger a heart attack in a woman. So stress needs to be managed. Mind-body medicine is real medicine. And our conventional medical world has not yet sort of grasped this, that if you treat depression, you're actually treating cardiovascular health. And there's a strong link between depression, anxiety, mood disorders, and cardiovascular health. I mean, there are plenty of articles written on this. It just hasn't been incorporated clinically in very many cardiology practices, let's put it that way, right? So, find what works for you. It could be nature walks, it could be meditation, guided imagery, cognitive behavioral therapy. There's yoga, there's, Qigong, Tai Chi. There's wonderful different ways that you can incorporate east-west, right? And but you have to find what works for you, or combination of things, so that you can deal with stress. Get that cortisol level to a safe, manageable level, and your heart will love you for it.
I love that. And there is so many nuggets in there, guys. So take charge of your health. We encourage you. There are so many simple steps that Dr. Felice has just mentioned. And don't try them all at once, because that's just too overwhelming. Pick one or two things that you can do and really, stick with it. And then add that next thing, pick a category in fitness, pick something with your diet, and incorporate that. And as you incorporate it over a matter of days up to weeks, then that's going to become a habit. It's going to become a good habit. So just keep incorporating that in there. I love that. And stress, totally. I understand the stress. Our bodies basically, our society has kind of almost programmed us that we think that stress is normal, and our bodies stay in the fight or flight syndrome most of the time, so it's like, okay, we need to find that way to de-stress. And I love those examples you've given. That's awesome. And before we go, so Dr. Felice has been kind enough to give us a gift, and there's going to be a link, Take Charge of Your Health/Felice. It'll be at the top or the bottom. I'm not sure which way it's going to show up on the video, but it will be there. And it is on Menopause SOS. So you want to give us a little tidbit about what that is.
Well, it covers a lot of the things that we talked about, excellent nutrition and fitness and all of the different, it's all lifestyle based, because I'm not going to give a book about how to use hormones, although I love hormones and I prescribe them, but it's not in my little book. But one thing that you can be assured of is that the lifestyle habits are going to be very similar whether you're 20 or you're 60. It's foundationally the same. So it doesn't matter if you're not in menopause, you can still learn a lot from reading my little book that I'm giving out to you. And if you are a female, you can be sure that you will head into menopause, because as I think Ben Franklin said it, and he was a guy. He said, like, there are only two things that are for sure in life, and it's death and taxes. That's what a guy says. Okay, a girl says, hey guys, menopause. Okay, so maybe death, I'm not sure about taxes, but probably, but for sure menopause, right? We can't escape it. We can try to delay it. By the way, the diet that I'm telling you can delay menopause, and that actually matters. There's actually data showing that the longer you keep your hormones, the better off every organ is. Certainly your cardiovascular system is going to be healthier if you keep your hormones longer. So all of these things are good for the long haul in terms of maintaining your hormones, maintaining your ovaries. So we want to have functioning ovaries as long as possible. So all of these things will be very useful for every age group.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you for being with me today, Dr. Felice. I really appreciate your time that you've spent with us, being here on this summit with me. So thank you once again for being here. And thank you everybody for watching. Take charge of your health. Simple steps you can do today to take control of your physical and your mental health. Keep watching. Talk to you later. Bye.